Injustice at the Park, a story that will break your heart. Before we begin, if you believe in spreading awareness and amplifying voices that deserve to be heard, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can bring attention to stories that truly matter. The late afternoon sun cast golden hues over St. Mary's Park in South Bronx, painting the basketball court in long, shadowy streaks. 16-year-old Michaela Carter sat on a worn bench near the court's edge, her simple sweater pulled close as the crisp air began to set in. Her phone rested in her hands, the screen glowing faintly, but Michaela wasn't really paying attention. She loved moments like this, quiet, reflective, in a world where she often felt judged before she could even speak. Moments like these felt like a rare gift. But her calm was about to be shattered. A few feet away, a white woman in a tailored beige trench coat briskly walked down the path. Her blonde hair was tightly pulled back, and her eyes scanned the area sharply as though she were a self-appointed guardian of the park. When her gaze landed on Michaela, her steps faltered. Her expression twisted slightly. Was it confusion? Disdain? Michaela couldn't tell, but she could feel the weight of it, that familiar heavy stare. The woman stopped, standing just a little too close, and spoke under her breath, but loud enough for Michaela to hear. What is she doing here? Michaela's fingers froze over her phone, her body tense. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She'd been in this situation before, the whispering, the staring, the suspicion. She had done nothing wrong, and yet here she was, on the verge of being treated like she didn't belong. Then came the sound she dreaded most. The woman pulled out her phone. "Yes, hi." The woman's voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "I'm at St. Mary's Park, and there's a black teenager here sitting alone near the basketball court. She's been here for a while, and I don't know, something doesn't feel right. Can you send someone over?" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Michaela's chest tightened. She hadn't moved an inch, hadn't said a word, and yet, to this stranger, her very presence was a threat. She tried to breathe, but the sound of distant sirens clawed at her nerves. They were coming for her. She glanced down at her phone, her screen lighting up with meaningless notifications. She wanted to run, to vanish into the crowd, but she knew better. Running would only make things worse. The squad car pulled up moments later, the red and blue lights washing over the park's vibrant scenery. Michaela stood up instinctively, gripping her phone tightly in one hand. Two officers stepped out. One of them, Officer Harris, walked toward her with a purposeful stride. His hand hovered close to his holster, his sharp eyes scanning her up and down. The blonde woman stood a few feet away, her expression smug, arms crossed, as if her job was done. "That's her," she said, pointing directly at Michaela. "She's been sitting here, acting suspicious." "Got some ID on you?" Officer Harris asked, his tone flat but firm. Michaela's throat felt dry, and her hand shook as she pulled her ID from her pocket. She handed it over without a word, her eyes darting toward the small crowd that had begun to gather nearby. Parents, kids, strangers with phones, recording from a safe distance. But no one intervened. No one spoke up. The officer barely glanced at her ID before shoving it back into her hand. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said, reaching for her arm. "What? Why?" Michaela's voice cracked as panic swelled in her chest. "I didn't do anything." "Let's not make this difficult," he replied, his grip tightening on her wrist. Tears stung Michaela's eyes. She wanted to scream, to tell him this wasn't fair, but her voice felt stuck in her throat. She glanced at the blonde woman, who was now smirking, as if she had just won some unspoken battle. The humiliation burned through Michaela like fire. She hadn't done anything wrong. She just wanted to sit in the park. That's all. The officer tugged her toward the squad car, the world around her blurring. The stares, the whispers, the phones, all of it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Then suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, commanding. "What exactly is the problem here?" The officer froze mid-step. Michaela turned her head and saw her mother, Naomi Carter, walking toward them. Naomi was a tall, powerful figure dressed in a tailored suit, her FBI badge clipped to her waist. Her every step radiated authority. "Mom?" Michaela whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. Naomi's gaze locked onto the officer like a laser. "I asked you a question," she said, her tone even but deadly serious. "What's going on here?" The officer's hand immediately dropped from Michaela's wrist. He straightened up, his expression shifting from stern to uneasy. The blonde woman took a step back, her smirk vanishing in an instant. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone in the park could feel it. "Ma'am," the officer began, but Naomi cut him off. "No," she said, her voice steady but full of steel. "You don't get to ma'am me. My daughter was sitting on that bench, minding her own business, and you've humiliated her in front of an entire park because of a phone call from someone who can't mind their own business." The blonde woman's face flushed bright red. "I was just—" "Just what?" Naomi snapped, turning to face her. "Just profiling a child because of her skin color? Just assuming the worst about a teenager who wasn't doing anything wrong?" The woman stammered, her confidence crumbling under Naomi's piercing gaze. I didn't mean—" "Save it," Naomi said coldly, "because the only thing you've accomplished today is showing everyone here exactly who you are." Michaela's chest heaved as she struggled to hold back tears. Her mother wrapped a protective arm around her, pulling her close. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked softly, her tone shifting from sharp to gentle. Michaela nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, thanks, Mom." Naomi turned back to the officer, her expression hardening once more. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said. "You're supposed to protect people, not harass them." The officer looked down, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Naomi didn't reply. She simply walked Michaela toward their car, her arm still around her daughter's shoulders. As they left the park, Michaela looked back at the crowd. The phones were still recording. The whispers still carried. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. How would you have reacted in Michaela's situation? Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? Let us know in the comments below. Stories like Michaela's happen every day, and it's time we start paying attention. If this moved you, please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Together, we can make a difference. As the car pulled away from St. Mary's Park, Michaela sat in silence, staring out the window. Her mother, Naomi Carter, gripped the steering wheel tightly, her jaw clenched. The tension in the car was thick, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on them like an invisible force. Michaela finally broke the silence. Why does it always have to be like this? Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years of frustration and exhaustion. Naomi glanced at her daughter, her expression softening. Because some people don't see beyond what's right in front of them, she said. And for people like us, that means they see what they want to see, not who we really are. Michaela turned to face her mother, her voice trembling. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just sitting there. How can someone look at me and just decide I don't belong? Naomi pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to her daughter. Michaela, listen to me, she said firmly, her voice steady. What happened back there is not your fault. It never was, and it never will be. People like that woman, they're scared of what they don't understand. And instead of educating themselves, they lash out, trying to control what they think is a threat. Michaela's eyes filled with tears. But it's not fair, she whispered. Why do I have to prove I'm not a threat? Why do I have to be perfect just to feel safe? Naomi reached over, taking Michaela's hand in hers. You shouldn't have to, she said, and it's not fair. But until the world changes, you have to remember who you are. You're brilliant, Michaela. You're kind and strong, and you're going to change the world one day. Don't ever let people like her make you forget that. Michaela nodded, wiping her tears away. What if you hadn't been there, Mom? She asked, her voice barely audible. What would have happened to me? Naomi's heart clenched at the question. She didn't want to imagine it, but she knew the answer all too well. That's why I do what I do, she said, because there are too many kids like you out there, Michaela. Kids who don't have someone to step in, someone to fight for them. That's why we have to keep pushing, keep standing up, and keep showing them that we're more than their fear and ignorance. Later that evening, as Michaela sat on her bed, she couldn't shake the memory of the woman's face, the smugness in her expression, as if she'd done something heroic by calling the police. She thought about Officer Harris, how quickly his suspicion turned to shame when her mother appeared, and she thought about all the kids like her who wouldn't have a mother like Naomi to protect them. She picked up her journal and began to write. Why does the world see me as a threat before it sees me as a person? How can I change their minds when they won't even listen? Today, I realize something. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to myself that I'm more than their assumptions. But it's exhausting, and I don't want to carry this burden alone. As she wrote, a fire began to burn inside her. Michaela decided she wouldn't let this moment define her. Instead, she would use it as fuel, She'd write stories, share her experiences, and make sure people couldn't ignore voices like hers anymore. She couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, she could change the future. The next morning, Michaela and Naomi sat at the breakfast table, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Naomi placed her coffee cup down and looked at Michaela. "How are you feeling today?" she asked gently. Michaela shrugged. "Still angry, still confused, but I think I want to do something about it." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to write about what happened, share my story. Maybe if people hear it, they'll think twice before judging someone just because of the way they look." Naomi smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's a good start, Michaela. Stories have power. They can open eyes and change hearts." Michaela nodded. "And maybe one day I'll write something big enough that people like that woman can't ignore it." Naomi leaned over and kissed her daughter on the forehead. "You already have that power, Michaela. Don't ever let anyone take it away from you." Stories like Michaela's are all too common, and they shouldn't be. Have you ever faced or witnessed a moment of prejudice like this? How did it make you feel? Share your experiences in the comments below, because the more we talk about these issues, the more we can work toward change. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can amplify the voices that need to be heard. Change begins with awareness, and awareness begins with you.